Well, it's Tuesday night, and you know the deal. You know what that means. Wait a minute, it's Tuesday night? Yeah. Yeah, it's Tuesday night. What the hell's going on? Well, we can talk about that, friends. We can talk about that. But before we talk about that, you know what we have to do. It's been a minute since I've heard from my buddy Rob Currie. Take me there, Rob. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. It's Tuesday night, which is not normally when I record a podcast. There are many reasons for this, but we don't need to get into any of them. The fact of the matter is, it's Tuesday night and I'm recording a podcast. Why? Well, because Mondays, sometimes, some weeks, half of them maybe now, are going to be hard. Well, we're back into off-season training, friends, and that means I got to be in the gym more than I like. And Mondays are a great day, and so are Wednesdays, and so are Fridays. Unfortunately, on a Monday when I'm getting home from work and going to the gym and then having dinner and trying to get a podcast done, invariably something's got to give. And unfortunately, as much as I love doing this, it's the podcast. And so on those weeks, it probably means I'm going to turn up on a Tuesday. And that's okay. I would have said we've just addressed the elephant in the room, but we haven't. Because the actual elephant in the room is right over my left shoulder. And it's orange. And it's a pumpkin. I can hear your questions. Chris, are we going to do a pumpkin beer tonight? No, we're not. Calm your pants. Are we going to do a pumpkin beer at all before now and Halloween? Solidly, probably not. But maybe. But let's be honest, probably not. Anyway, all that to be said, hey, it's been a minute. I know I've been missing. It occurred to me, I realized this is season 13. Lucky number 13, as the kids would say. I believe that's what the kids would say. I think season 13 is going to be cursed with an irregular schedule. My goal, I use Overcast as a podcast player. And if you scroll through your subs, and I've got a lot, I'm not going to lie, I am a heavy podcast consumer. There are ones that go into like hibernation. If you haven't dropped an app in like a month or something, I don't know. I don't even know what the number is. If you haven't done it, your podcast becomes like inactive. And it gives you this gross little icon to let you know. I think my only goal is I just don't want that icon on this podcast, at least until I decide to dust it and say that we're done. But is that today? It is not. It is not. Why is that the case? Well, because I have a beer, I have a microphone, and I want to tell you all about it. And I got a lot of things to catch up on, too. A lot of stuff's happened. I mean, the last time I talked to you, I'm pretty sure, was the Czechvar check-in, and I was talking about the fact that we won everything at the rugby, which admittedly wasn't actually even all that long ago. I think it was like 3 weeks ago. It's not that big a deal. It's just the Thanksgiving holiday. I wasn't going to do a podcast then. The week before that, it was my birthday, and as much as I like all of you, anyway, see what happened? Now 3 weeks later, plus a day, here we are. Here we are drinking a beer. Let's just do it. Let's just do it. I had a couple of interesting IPAs. All IPAs in my fridge. Actually, that's not true. The whole bottom of my fridge right now is Great Lakes Premium Lager, which is really nice too. But I wanted something a little bit more thinky. And this is what I chose. Speaking of Great Lakes, this, if you're not watching the video, is a 2010 West Coast IPA. Wasn't 2010 a great year for West Coast IPAs? My son was 2. My daughter was not in existence yet. I don't even think we were working on her at that point. I mean, I think we were loosely not, we weren't attempting not to get pregnant, but we weren't working super hard at it. That came later. And then we had a baby. Medicine is a wonderful thing, friends. Modern medicine is amazing. Anyway, this is all to say 2010. I wonder It might have been around 2010 that I actually started my beer blog. I think it was in and around there. That was 14 years ago. How about that? Time flies, friends. Oh, I just noticed my fridge just turned itself off. I forgot to turn it off. It's been that long. Well, you know what? We're going to leave it on. We're going to go old school. This is a 2010 IPA. You're going to get fridge sounds in the background of this iPad. iPad? Podcast. It's a podcast. I don't even know why I said iPad. There isn't an iPad in this room. There are iPads in my house. They're just not here. What a mess. You know what I need to do? I just need to go ahead and crack this beer open. I shouldn't sound so downtrodden. I'm about to drink a pretty good beer. Oh boy, kids at home. You're going to like this one. Can we see the glass? By the way, I know I discussed this in a previous episode. I'm going to pour this one a little heavy-handed. Pretty heavy-handed. Here we go. Less angle. If you're watching the video, you'll see what I mean. If you're not, you can watch it on YouTube or Instagram. Toronto Beer Podcast. Look it up. Here it is. Actually, it's kind of hard between... I'm just going to slide back a little. I wonder if the audio got picked up by the microphone. What are we dealing with here? Well, a generous head, but don't worry, that's going to drop pretty rapidly. This beer, is it hazy? It is not. It's bordering on brilliantly clear. It's definitely clear. It's a handsome straw yellow color with a generous frothy white head, as you would expect. 2010 IPAs. Remember these guys? Sticky, resinous, piney, sometimes a little fruity, but remember 14 years ago, fruit in an IPA, that would be the exception, not the rule. It was a whole different world, friends, a whole different world. Let's take a sniff. By the way, I've been rocking a bit of a cold for over a week now. Gosh, I hate the early season cold. It's still giving me a bit of a hassle. So I'm not sure how the old schnauzer is working, but we're going to give it some paces here. Okay. My sense of smell is definitely limited right now. But we're gonna work with it. We're gonna work with what I got. Oddly, the first thing I noticed here was malt. Shouldn't be the first thing you notice in an IPA, but again, my sense of smell is a little wonky right now. Also, there's a generous foamy head here. I'm trying to shake it out a little bit. Here we go. Yeah, okay. So the hops are there for 100%. For 100%. They're a little piney. You remember the description I just gave a minute ago? We're in the wheelhouse. Unsurprisingly. I mean, there's citrus peel for sure. I didn't mention that in that, but it's part of it. Think like grapefruit peel. It's kind of what we're hitting on. It's a little earthy. On the nose, and again, limited nasal capabilities right now. Dankness, which is to say sort of wet forest floor, leaning in towards weediness. Not a thing that I'm getting right now, but it could be there. Who's to say? I'd say mainly sort of spicy, leafy, grapefruit peely, piney. Did I mention piney? There's definitely some pine here. This actually, if I'm honest with you, and this is high praise. It smells a little bit like Lone Pine from from Sawdust City. Which, if I'm honest with you, Lone Pine is pretty much a 2010 West Coast IPA. So we're doing it right, guys. We're doing it right. All right, I'm going to drink it. I want another sip. But this is pretty tasty. Mm, definitely evergreeny, resinous. Funny enough, that citrus peel, it's there, but it's. I almost wonder if maybe my brain was just connecting dots, and maybe one or two of those dots, i.e., the citrus peel one, was a little faded, a little less evident, and my brain still connected that dot. It's there, but it's not prevalent. This is very much a pine forward, which again, like like lone pine, um, herbal, a little spicy, quite earthy, oh, and very familiar. Let me have another sip. Oh yeah. Just before I say what I was about to say, I was going to get back a little bit deeper onto the hops. Really briefly, an interesting point on this. There is a very notable malt profile. There's definitely a nice clean barley taste. There's also some crystal malt, 100%. Um, it's there. I can taste it. It is not prevalent. It's not Ontario Pale Ale levels of crystal malt. It's just there, sort of almost as an acknowledgement of the fact that there's so much hops. We need a bit of sugar to just knock that down a little, and it's doing exactly what it should. In fact, not unlike both Bone Shaker and Lone Pine, I'm almost certain have crystallized malt in them, and both of them use it in basically the same way. And in fact, those three uh, brewers who came up with these recipes, I'm pretty sure Sam came up with Lone Pine. I'm almost positive. Sam and Ian, and of course Lackey. Um, they're capable of using crystal malt the way that it's supposed to be used. Crystal malt became sort of a public enemy in in the IPA category. Um, yeah, let's talk about that. I just need a sip of beer. There was a thing around 2010, really, is when you first started hearing about it. Um, I'm not going to say IPAs were easy to make. IPAs, and certainly an IPA of this quality, not easy to make. It's not an easy thing to make. Well, is it an easy thing to make mediocrely? I don't know if that's a word. Yeah, ish. If you're capable of making beer, you could pull this off. But to do it really well in balance in a way that even though you're working with some pretty extremes, none of them kind of get away with themselves. That does take a bit of skill. Unfortunately, at the time, everybody was trying to make this sort of an IPA. Uh, really, everyone was basically trying to make Dogfish Head 60. Think about that. When's the last time you had a Dogfish Head beer, period, and specifically 60-minute IPA? Uh, it's certainly, I don't believe, available in Ontario anymore. It was for a little while. Oh, here's Ben Johnson's just joined. Hey, Ben, look what I'm drinking. Oh, Great Lakes 2010 IPA. Have you had that yet, buddy? You'd like this one. We're talking about IPAs in the 2010s, and the fact that the reason why I think crystal malt became maligned was people were trying to make these big, massive, squeaky, resinous West Coasty IPAs. Again, Dogfish had 60 or even 90-minute, really hot bomby beers, and they would screw it up. And like they were piloting, and they'd be like, okay, well, that didn't work. It's uncomfortably bitter. And wait a minute. Instagram always asks if I want to join your broadcast. Seems forward, but one day I will. Like a broadcast channel? I don't think I have one of them, unless this is a broadcast. I get asked that by people all the time. I always ignore it too, Ben. Don't worry, you're doing the right thing. Anyway, as brewers would iterate out these massive IPAs in an effort to make up for the fact that they hadn't really figured out how to bitter IPAs, like bittering hops, I guess were tough. They would be like, okay, well, that batch, I loved how resinous my mouth felt at the end of it, but it was challenging to physically consume because of its bitterness. What will we do? You guessed it. We'll add some crystal malt. We'll put some sugar in there because sugar is the counter to bitter. And what you ended up with was these weird IPAs and pale ales, mainly IPAs, that were uncomfortably hoppy. This is when people started saying, "Oh, all beers taste like," what was it they would always say hops tasted like? Like chewing a pine tree, or they would say something like that. Because all the brewer had done was like, "I want a ton of hops in here," and I know that Dogfish Head is adding hops continuously through the 60-second or 60-minute boil. I wanna do something similar. Well, how am I gonna offset that? Well, I'm gonna dump, like, 10% of my malt bill is gonna be crystal malt, which is problematic on a number of fronts, up to and including the fact that crystal malt is an unmodified malt. It does not ferment the same way that other malts do. That's a whole other story. All this to say, this is a very roundabout way to get to the point. This 2010 IPA definitely has crystal malt in it, but it's used in a way that I feel like that's how he meant to do it from the get go. By the way, I say he, I'm assuming this is a Mike Lackey beer. If it's not, then let's go with they. How they assumed to make it from the beginning, which is to say, like 2% of your malt bill maybe is crystal malt, maybe less, maybe one, enough that I can taste it, and enough that it does certainly offset some of the bittering hops, but not so much that you think all I can taste here is a lot of crystal malt and like bordering on plant material levels of hops. That's not what's happened here. This is showcasing like what the ideal 2010 IPA was, which again, I note, it tastes a lot like Lone Pine from Sawdust City. And I promise you that wasn't an accident. If you'd asked whoever was the designer of this beer, what are some good West Coast IPAs still available in the province? I'm willing to bet Lone Pine would be on their list. Just saying. This is a beautiful 2010 IPA, pardon me, 2010 West Coast IPA from our friends at Great Lakes. If you like me like a good West Coast IPA, or like other folks, some watching, some not, uh, this is pretty good. If you're one of those people in 2010 who said every beer tastes like you're chewing on a pine tree, you still might want to give this one a whirl because this would have been one of the exceptions back then, where it is definitely piney, but like I'm not getting any coating effect on my mouth. My teeth aren't even close to squeaky. And I mean, I don't mind a squeaky IPA. This is not one of those. Just herbal, spicy, piney, bit of, I was going to say bit of forest floor, maybe a bit of forest floor, a bit of citrus peel, but like it's actually kind of nice that the only citrus I'm getting is a bit of citrus peel, and it's like not the first thing that I think about. That's 2010 IPA, man. I don't even know if this thing has Citra in it. It probably does, but that's not the first thing that comes to my mind when I drink it. It's such a refreshing change. Now, that said, I've got cans of Thrust in my fridge, which is amazing and a completely different kind of IPA. There's nothing wrong with that. I love what we've done with IPA. I think it's great. I do kind of also like this though. It's a little bit like, okay, this is going to be a bit weird. I want to I want to establish at the beginning of this anecdote that I consider myself an environmentalist for whatever that means in 2024. I make many, many decisions in my life, framing them in the context of my impact on the world around me from an environmental point of view. Many. Some might say more than is healthy, but I think I'm okay still. I haven't gotten totally crazy, but many. Having caveated that, are you aware when a car drives past you that's old enough that it doesn't have fuel injectors, it has a carburetor? This is such a stupid analogy. This 2010 IPA. Hang on a second. Look, I have 2 cans of beer here. If you're not watching the video, I'm sorry. You have to follow along. I have a second can of beer in my hand. I'm not going to open it. Don't worry. On my left, I don't know what's happening with the cameras. Some of them are reversed, some of them aren't. I can't figure all this stuff out. But in one hand, I'm holding a 2010 West Coast IPA. In the other hand, I'm holding a Thrust, an IPA from Great Lakes. These are both fantastic IPAs. Thrust is an IPA that has fuel injectors. 2010 West Coast IPA is a beer that has a carburetor. So dumb. There's a familiarity to the aroma of an engine that uses a carburetor. I have a motorcycle that has a carburetor. You see it more often in motorcycles these days. Most cars don't have carburetors anymore. Like, I think you have to go back to like the 80s. There's probably, actually, I don't even know. There might not have even been any really being produced in the 90s that had carburetors. Fuel injectors are like little aerosol. Well, they're not like aerosol cans, but just work with me on this. It's like each cylinder in your engine has a little aerosol can that mists the fuel into the air in the cylinder to create the fuel air mixture to create an explosive environment, because every time your engine moves, there's been multiple little mini gas explosions in it. If you drive not an electric, clearly not an electric. If you drive a gas powered car, which still most people who drive cars drive gas powered cars. Carburetors work slightly differently. They used a Venturi effect to aerosolize gas into an air mixture in an open dome, basically. And then through the compression cycle in the engine, sucks that fuel air mixture into the cylinder, where it then combusts and creates the explosion. The difference is, for a moment, that gas, that fuel air mixture is not in the engine. It's in this sort of domey thing on top of the engine, or again, on a motorcycle, it's on the side of the engine for the most part. What that means, though, is some of that fuel air mixture doesn't get pulled into the engine. And one of 2 things, well, actually, there's more than 2, but let's just generalize and say one of 2 things happens. On the one hand, it burns off in the carburetor, which does happen a little bit. But that combustion doesn't then pass through the cleaning cycle of the engine, including like the catalytic converter and the exhaust pipes. You just get the natural smell of that fuel air mixture burning. And then on top of that, a little bit of it doesn't burn at all. It gets out of the carburetor. And so when a car that has a carbureted engine drives past you or is operating in your vicinity, you get a much clearer smell of burning gasoline, is basically what it comes down to. We figured out how to make cars not stink or pollute as much. But if you're around one that still does stink and pollute, you're totally aware of it. That's what this beer is. That's such a crazy analogy. I don't even know why I went with it, but I did. This is a really nice. This is like a Chevrolet Monte Carlo. I think it's a Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Let's look it up. How do you spell? There you go. Chevrolet Monte. Well, let's make sure we spell it right. Yeah, it's a Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Yeah, you're darn right it is. Great Lakes Brewery's 2010 West Coast IPA is the Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Not the new one, by the way. They rebooted it in like the 2000s. Not that one. That one's got fuel injectors. I want the big block V8 with a carburetor the size of a garbage can lid. in there. And somehow still the engine looks like there's a lot of space around it in the engine compartment because it's just such a big car. My dad had a Monte Carlo. We might be doing some Freudian analysis here. Anyway, this beer is like a Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Just by the smell and to a lesser extent by the taste. I've never tasted a Monte Carlo, but you get where I'm going here. I it it lets me know that I know what it is. Even though people don't do this anymore. There's in scare quotes a better way of doing an IPA. And again, I love it. I love a New England IPA. I love an East Coast IPA. I enjoy driving a car that has fuel injectors for a number of reasons. But there's something about a car with a carburetor. And there's something about a 2010 West Coast IPA that's distinct. And I was going to say pleasant. To some people, pleasant. It is that. This beer is amazing. I love this beer. Like, I would love it if they just started making this on the reg and we're like, Lone Pine 2010 West Coast IPA. They might need to rebrand it because this name feels really one-offy. But if they could just call it West Coast IPA, I'd be fine with that. It's really, really, really good. Friends, we've gone on some journeys tonight. I'm not going to talk about food. I'm not going to talk about rugby. I'm not going to talk about events. I'm not going to talk about any about that. Oh, I do have a question here. Sorry. That is a Surly bike behind me. That is a Surly Crosscheck. It's 2016. If you or anyone you know wants to purchase 2016 Surly Crosscheck in immaculate condition with a number of upgrades, I'm selling it for my friend. The part that gets me the horniest is it's got a Velo orange crankset on it that is just... And if none of that means anything to you, thanks for listening. Don't worry about it. Let's talk about IPAs again. By the way, could I be a little more hipster drinking a 2010 West Coast IPA with a Surly mountain bike in the background? My apologies, friends. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to shut it down. I'm not going to promise that I'm doing this next week because I don't know these days. Season 13 is going to go on up until the point when I have a much more regular schedule. And then we'll do season 14 and hopefully have picked a day. But for now, I'm just going to piecemeal out episodes when and how I feel like it. And this one was a great one. This, by the way, is Great Lakes Brewery's 2010 West Coast IPA. I bought it from the brew pub, which is to say, I ordered on Uber Eats and a fella picked it up and brought it to me, along with Thrust and an entire slab of Great Lakes Premium Lager. And friends, I've said this before. I don't want to have to say it again, but I'm going to. You can get a slab, a 2-4, if you prefer, of Tall Boys of Great Lakes Premium Lager for like $50-something. So you go onto Uber Eats and you order one of them, and then you look through what else they have at the brew pub today. And maybe it's 2010 West Coast IPA. Maybe it's Thrust and IPA. Maybe it's their pumpkin beer, if that's a thing that you enjoy. I'm not going to yuck your yum. If that's what you get down to, don't let me stop you. There's some interesting German sounding beers. Frühschoppen, Düsseldorf. I don't know. I'm just making up German sounding words now. But order it. Start with the slab of premium lager and then just layer on a couple of other things and then hit go. And a friendly Uber driver, bike rider, something. Gosh, I hope it's not a bike rider. I haven't had a guy on a bike yet. More than once, I've had a guy who the app thought was on a bike, but he definitely arrived in a car. Anyway, the point is, that's an easy way. And do I hate Uber? Yeah. Not as much as Amazon. And do you know a place I buy more things than from Uber? Amazon. Capitalism makes terrible people out of all of us. Anyway, that's not a bad way to get this beer. Is it available at the LCBO? Probably not. Is it available at the beer store? Oh, almost certainly not. Grocery stores, highly doubtful. You're gonna have to get this one from Great Lakes, and if you like delicious things, it's worth the effort. So, Great Lakes 2010 West Coast IPA. I'm gonna shut it down for the night. My buddy Rob Currie's got a song. He's got a song in his back pocket. That guy's got a song in every pocket he's got. If he had a pocket on his shoe, there'd be a song in it. And this one, oh, I've had some more questions all the way back from 2010. It's not from 2010. A 14-year-old IPA would not be an appealing thing to consume um, by any standards, no matter how well you kept it. It's a 2010 style West Coast IPA. Oh, I just looked 6.5%. I haven't even read the label, by the way, which is an interesting color choice for an older fella in a slightly darkened room. Now, there's way too many words here, and it's like green on purple. Actually, on camera, it looks easier. I almost could read it easier on camera than I could in real life. Well, there you go. Tell you what, if you're watching the video, go ahead and pause it there and read that in my voice, and then call it done. Friends. Anyway, back to Rob Currie in one of his many pockets. He's going to pull this song out. We're going to say goodnight. I'll see you. I won't see you at all. This is a podcast. This is a very one-way class kind of situation. But I will talk at you again before too much happens. That's my promise to you. And this is Rob Currie's promise to you. Good night.